You won't believe how far people will go to protect a lie. My name is Daniel Hayes, and a few years ago I worked night shifts at a shipping depot in a small town called Ravenbrook, tucked away in the valleys of northern Somerset. It was the kind of place you'd drive through without noticing. An old rail line cutting through farmland, a single gas station that closed at 9, and the warehouse where I spent 5 years of my life stacking boxes and managing logistics. I actually liked working nights. There was something peaceful about it. Less noise, fewer people to navigate around. Just the steady hum of conveyor belts, the distant beep of forklifts, and the occasional echo of footsteps down empty aisles. The fluorescent lights cast everything in a cold blue glow, and I found comfort in the routine. But that peace didn't last forever, because that's where I met Nicole Porter. Nicole was one of those people who made everything feel complicated, like high school drama bleeding into adult life. She had this effortless charm, always smiling, always quick with a joke, but there was something else behind her eyes, something calculating that most people didn't notice right away. She was married. Everyone knew it. My wife, Vanessa, had actually met her once at a company barbecue through mutual friends. Nicole wore her wedding ring proudly and talked about her husband constantly, at least in public. At first, we got along fine. She was funny, confident, and had a sharp sense of humor that could cut through the monotony of night shift. We'd exchange sarcastic comments during breaks, and it felt harmless enough. Then one night around 2 in the morning, everything changed. I was doing a routine equipment check in the far loading bay, a corner of the warehouse where the security camera had been broken for months. That's when I saw her with Marcus, one of our night supervisors. They weren't discussing work schedules or inventory reports. They were pressed against the concrete wall, wrapped around each other in a way that left zero room for misinterpretation. The sound of my footsteps on the metal stairs made them both freeze. Nicole's eyes locked onto mine, wide with shock and something else. Fear, maybe, or calculation. Marcus looked like he'd been caught stealing, his face flushed red even in the dim lighting. I didn't say anything. Just turned around and walked back the way I came, my heart pounding against my ribs. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to pretend I hadn't seen anything at all. But in that one moment of eye contact, Nicole knew. I had information that could destroy her carefully constructed image, and that made me dangerous. A few nights later, she found me during my break. I was sitting alone in the break room, eating a sandwich and scrolling through my phone, when she slid into the chair across from me. "Hey, Daniel," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We're cool, right? I mean, what happens on night shift stays on night shift, you know?" I looked up at her, trying to read the expression on her face. She was smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was tension in her shoulders, a tightness in her jaw. "Sure," I said simply, wanting to end the conversation as quickly as possible. "Good." She leaned back, relaxing slightly. "I knew you were a reasonable guy, not like some people who make everything into drama." Her tone made it clear this wasn't a casual conversation. She wasn't asking for my discretion. She was demanding it, wrapped in pleasantries and implied threats. Then Nicole got bolder. About a week later, she cornered me again in the break room when I was alone. This time, she sat next to me instead of across from me, way too close for comfort. I could smell her perfume, something floral and overpowering. "You ever get tired of pretending your life is perfect?" she whispered, her voice low and intimate. I immediately pulled back, creating distance between us. "Nicole, don't start that," she smirked, clearly enjoying my discomfort. "Relax, Daniel. I'm just saying it's easier if we both keep quiet about things we see. You know, mutual understanding." That's when the pieces clicked into place in my mind. She wasn't flirting. This was strategic. She wanted leverage, something to tie me to her, so that if I ever exposed what I knew about her and Marcus, she'd have ammunition to fire back. I stood up without finishing my coffee. I need to get back to work. After that encounter, I made a conscious effort to avoid Nicole. I took my breaks at different times, changed my routes through the warehouse, and kept our interactions strictly professional when they were unavoidable. But she didn't stop trying. A couple of weeks later, things got worse. We'd hired a new maintenance technician named Calvin, a friendly guy in his mid-20s who was always cracking jokes and trying to fit in with the night crew. He was eager, maybe too eager, and he didn't understand the complicated dynamics that existed between certain people. That night, I was doing an equipment check in one of the storage areas when Nicole appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Before I could make an excuse to leave, Calvin wandered in, grinning at what he probably thought was just friendly workplace banter. "Hey guys, what's going on?" he asked cheerfully, oblivious to the tension in the air. Nicole immediately shifted her body language, moving closer to me. She placed her hand on my forearm and looked up at me with an expression that was far too intimate for a professional setting. "Come on, Daniel," she said, her voice deliberately suggestive. "You don't have to pretend. Nobody's going to know." I jerked my arm away like I'd been burned. "Nicole, what are you doing? Knock it off." Calvin's friendly grin evaporated instantly. His eyes darted between us, clearly uncomfortable with what he was witnessing. He mumbled something about needing to check on a maintenance issue and practically fled from the storage area. My stomach sank. I knew how that must have looked to him. Nicole had just manufactured a situation that could be interpreted any number of ways. None of them good for me, and she'd done it with a witness present. I left without saying another word to her. I didn't think much about the incident for the next few days. Calvin seemed normal when I saw him around the warehouse, and Nicole kept her distance. Maybe she'd finally gotten the message that I wanted nothing to do with her games. Then, exactly 1 week later, I got called into human resources. The HR manager, a stern woman named Patricia Wilkins, sat behind her desk with a thick folder in front of her. Nicole was already there, sitting in one of the chairs with tissues in her hand, her eyes red like she'd been crying. Marcus stood behind her chair like some kind of guardian, his arms crossed over his chest. "Daniel, please sit down," Patricia said, her tone professional but cold. I sat in the chair next to Nicole, confused and increasingly alarmed. "What's this about?" Patricia opened the folder. "We've received a formal complaint about your behavior toward Nicole, multiple instances of inappropriate conduct and unwanted advances." My mind went completely blank for a moment. "What? That's not what happened at all." Nicole let out a small sob, dabbing at her eyes with the tissue. "I tried to handle it privately," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought if I just talked to him, he'd understand I wasn't interested. But he kept pushing." I stared at her in disbelief. She was good. The tears, the vulnerable posture, the way she avoided looking directly at me. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed her myself. "This is insane," I said, turning to Patricia. "She's the one who's been coming on to me. Ask anyone on night shift. Ask." "We have," Patricia interrupted. "We've spoken with several people, including Calvin Reed, who witnessed one of these incidents directly." My stomach dropped. Calvin, the maintenance tech who'd walked in on us in the storage area. He saw what happened. Nicole was the one. "That's not what Calvin reported," Marcus said, speaking for the first time. I looked at Marcus, finally understanding the full picture. He was Nicole's supervisor and her affair partner. Of course, he'd back her story, and apparently they'd gotten to Calvin somehow, convinced him to corroborate a version of events that made me the predator. "Calvin witnessed Nicole telling you to leave her alone," Patricia continued, reading from her notes. "He said you made inappropriate comments and touched her arm despite her clear discomfort. That's the complete opposite of what happened." My voice was rising, and I forced myself to take a breath. Getting angry would only make me look worse. Why would I harass a married woman? I'm married myself. My wife knows Nicole. Nicole's sobbing intensified. "That's what makes it so scary," she said through tears. "I thought we were friends. I trusted you." The performance was flawless. I sat there watching her destroy my reputation with practiced precision and realized that nothing I said would change how this looked. The meeting ended with me being placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. The rumor spread through the warehouse faster than I thought possible. By the next night shift, everyone knew. Daniel Hayes, the reliable logistics guy who'd worked there for 5 years, was suddenly that creep who harassed Nicole. People I'd considered friends stopped talking to me. Conversations would halt when I entered the break room. I'd catch people staring at me, whispering to each other when they thought I wasn't looking. The investigation dragged on for 8 brutal weeks. Every conversation with HR felt like an interrogation where I was already guilty. They brought up old text messages I'd sent to Nicole about work schedules, reframing normal professional communication as evidence of obsession. They questioned my attendance records, looking for patterns that might suggest I was timing my breaks to coincide with hers. I told Vanessa everything, of course. She believed me without hesitation, which was the only thing keeping me sane. But even her support couldn't shield me from what was happening at work. During the investigation, I learned more about what was really going on behind the scenes. Another coworker, someone who'd been at the warehouse longer than me, pulled me aside one day in the parking lot. "You need to know something," he said quietly, looking around to make sure we were alone. Marcus, Travis, and Dean, the 3 supervisors, they've been promising Calvin a promotion, lead maintenance tech position. But there's a catch. They want him to help them with some problems first. "What kind of problems?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "The kind where certain people need to disappear. You're not the first person Nicole's accused of something, Daniel. About 2 years ago, there was another guy. He saw something he shouldn't have, started asking questions. Within a month, he was gone. Sexual harassment complaint. Same playbook." My blood ran cold. This was a pattern, a deliberate strategy to eliminate anyone who might expose the affairs and whatever else was happening among the supervisors. The walls kept closing in. More witnesses came forward with vague stories about me being too friendly or making people uncomfortable. I recognized the game now. They were building a case so overwhelming that the truth wouldn't matter. After 8 weeks of this nightmare, I made a decision. I walked out mid-investigation, just didn't show up for my scheduled shift one night. I called Patricia the next morning and told her I was done. "I'm not going to keep fighting this," I said, my voice flat with exhaustion. "You've already decided I'm guilty, so I'm out. Daniel, if you leave now, it will be documented as abandoning your position during an active investigation," she warned. "That won't look good for future employment." "I don't care anymore. I'm done with this place." I hung up before she could respond. Vanessa found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. She wrapped her arms around me from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," she whispered. That place was toxic. The next few months were hard. I found contract work doing inventory management for a smaller logistics company in a neighboring town, but the pay was less and the hours were irregular. The experience at Ravenbrook had shaken my confidence in ways I hadn't expected. Every time I started a new job or met new coworkers, I wondered if they'd heard about me somehow, if the rumors had spread beyond that one warehouse in that one small town. The paranoia was exhausting, but Vanessa was my anchor. She never once doubted my version of events, never made me feel like I should have handled things differently. We grew closer through it all, our marriage actually stronger for having weathered the storm together. Slowly, life stabilized. I eventually landed a permanent position at a distribution center in Millfield, about 40 minutes from Ravenbrook. The work was similar, but the environment was completely different. Professional, respectful, no drama lurking in dark corners. 3 years passed. Ravenbrook became something I rarely thought about, a bad memory that faded with time. Then one morning, I got a message on my phone from a name I hadn't seen in years. Calvin Reed, the maintenance tech who'd testified against me. My first instinct was to delete it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey Daniel, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to talk to you about what happened. It's important. Can we meet?" I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave that chapter of my life closed. But another part needed to know why. Why had he lied? What had they offered him that was worth destroying someone's reputation? I showed the message to Vanessa. She read it twice, her expression thoughtful. "What do you want to do?" "I want to hear what he has to say," I admitted. "I need to understand." 2 days later, I met Calvin at a diner just outside Ravenbrook, a neutral location halfway between where we both lived now. Calvin looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his face was pale and drawn, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like someone who'd spent too long carrying something heavy and had finally reached his breaking point. "I owe you an apology," he said before I'd even fully sat down. The words came out rushed, like he'd been rehearsing them. "What I did to you, what I said in that HR meeting, it was all lies. You need to know that." I ordered coffee from the waitress, buying myself time to process this. "Then why did you say it?" "Because they promised me things. He couldn't meet my eyes. Marcus, Travis, and Dean. They told me if I backed up Nicole's story, I'd get promoted to lead maintenance tech. They said it was just helping solve a personnel problem, that you were causing issues for the company." "And you believed that?" He shook his head. "I was young. Stupid. I wanted that promotion so badly. I'd been working maintenance for 2 years and going nowhere. They made it sound so simple." Calvin's hands were shaking as he wrapped them around his own coffee cup. "After you left, I thought everything would go back to normal. I'd get my promotion, everyone would forget about the drama, and life would move on. But that's not what happened, I guessed. No." His voice cracked slightly. "Nicole kept seeing Marcus and the others. But then something went sideways between them. Some kind of deal or arrangement that fell apart. I never got the full story, but there was a lot of angry whispering in offices, doors slamming, that kind of thing." He paused, taking a sip of coffee like he needed the warmth. "That's when I found out what they'd really been doing. Marcus, Travis, and Dean had been skimming money from overtime claims. They'd been falsifying payroll records for over a year, padding their own hours and covering their tracks in the system." I leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "How do you know that?" "Because they asked me to help them with it. Said it was routine maintenance on the payroll software, just adjusting some numbers here and there. At first, I didn't realize what I was actually doing," Calvin continued. "They'd send me specific employee numbers and hour adjustments, and I'd enter them into the system. It seemed like legitimate corrections. But then the numbers got bigger, more frequent, and they started promising me a cut of the money if I kept quiet." "Did you take it?" I asked. He nodded miserably. "Yeah, I did. They paid me twice, about £500 each time. I told myself it was just fixing errors in the system, that someone was going to correct these eventually anyway. But I knew, deep down, I knew it was wrong." "What changed?" "The bonuses came around. End of fiscal year. We were all supposed to get performance bonuses based on our roles and seniority. I'd been promised a huge one because of my special contributions. But when the checks came out, mine was standard. Nothing extra. Meanwhile, Dean's cousin, who'd just been hired 3 months earlier, got promoted to lead maintenance tech. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. They used me completely, had me do their dirty work, made me lie for them, got me involved in their payroll fraud, and then cut me out like I was nothing." "That's when I started paying attention to what was really going on," Calvin said. "I began keeping records, screenshots of the changes they asked me to make, emails with their instructions, copies of the falsified payroll reports. I even saved some of Nicole's messages to Marcus that came through the company system before they got deleted." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the table toward me. My heart started pounding as I opened it. Inside were dozens of pages, printouts of emails showing Marcus instructing Calvin to adjust specific payroll entries, screenshots of the company's financial system showing discrepancies in overtime claims, text message conversations between Nicole and Marcus that were definitely not appropriate for coworkers, and buried in the middle of it all, copies of the HR correspondence about my case, including internal notes that showed they'd known Nicole's story had inconsistencies, but chose to pursue me anyway. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked, though I was already starting to understand. "Because you deserved better," Calvin said simply. "And because I can't live with what I did anymore. They cheated you, they cheated me, and they're still there, still doing the same things, still hurting people." He looked up at me finally, his eyes red-rimmed. "I shouldn't have helped them. I shouldn't have lied about you. I thought I was playing the game smart, but they played me worse. And now I realize that if I'd just told the truth from the beginning, none of this would have happened. You'd still have your job, I'd have my dignity, and maybe those supervisors would have been stopped years ago." I sat there for a long time, staring at the folder full of evidence. This was everything. Proof that Nicole had lied, that Marcus had coached her, that the entire investigation had been rigged. Proof of the financial fraud that had been going on for years. Proof that I'd been innocent all along. "What do you want me to do with this?" I asked quietly. "Whatever you think is right," Calvin said. "I just needed you to have the truth." After Calvin left the diner, I sat there for another hour, going through every page in that folder. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. These weren't just smoking guns. This was an entire arsenal. I thought about just throwing it all away, moving on with my life, and letting karma handle things in its own time. Part of me wanted nothing to do with Ravenbrook or anyone connected to it ever again. But then I thought about that 8-week investigation. The whispers and stares, the way my reputation had been destroyed so casually, so deliberately. The fact that they were still there, still doing this to other people. That night, I called Jason Porter, Nicole's husband. We'd met briefly at that company barbecue years ago, had exchanged maybe 10 words total. I found his number through social media and prepared myself for what would probably be the most uncomfortable conversation of my life. He answered on the third ring. "Hello? Jason? This is Daniel Hayes. We met a few years ago at a Ravenbrook company event. I don't know if you remember me." There was a pause. "Daniel? Yeah, I remember. Everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "No, actually, there's something you need to know about your wife, about what was really going on at Ravenbrook Depot." "What are you talking about?" His voice had shifted, becoming guarded. "Your wife had affairs with multiple supervisors at work. She also falsely accused me of harassment to cover up what she was doing. I have proof of all of it, and I think you deserve to know the truth." He was quiet for a long moment. "This is a pretty serious accusation to make." "I know. That's why I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to look at the evidence." I explained about Calvin, about the folder, about everything documented in those pages. Then I took photos of the most relevant documents and sent them to his email. "Look at those," I said. "Then decide what you want to do." He hung up without saying goodbye. 3 days later, Jason called me back. His voice was completely different now. Cold, controlled. The voice of someone who'd had their entire world shattered and had channeled their grief into focused anger. "I've filed for divorce," he said without preamble. "The papers were served this morning, and I've already spoken with a labor attorney. What Nicole did, what those supervisors did, it violated multiple workplace conduct laws and company ethics policies. They opened the company up to massive liability." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm going to make sure everyone involved answers for what they did. Not just to you, but to the company, to the employees who trusted them, and to me." He paused. "Would you be willing to speak with my attorney? Your testimony, combined with Calvin's evidence and my own investigation, it could bring everything down." I thought about Vanessa, about the life we'd built since leaving all that behind. Did I want to wade back into this mess? But then I thought about whoever might be working at Ravenbrook right now, unaware of the corruption around them, vulnerable to the same games that had destroyed me. "Yes," I said, "I'll talk to your attorney." The fallout hit Ravenbrook Depot like a bomb going off in slow motion. Jason's attorney filed both a divorce suit and a workplace misconduct complaint with the State Labor Board. That triggered a comprehensive ethics audit of the entire company. The investigation uncovered everything. Marcus, Travis, and Dean were all found guilty of falsifying payroll records and exploiting their positions for financial gain. The total amount they'd stolen over 3 years was nearly £200,000. Nicole's history of inappropriate conduct came out in full detail during the proceedings. It turned out I wasn't the first person she'd falsely accused. There had been 2 others before me, exactly like my former coworker had suspected. The company had paid settlements to both of them to avoid lawsuits, then buried the complaints. Within 4 months, all of them lost their jobs. Marcus, Travis, Dean, and Nicole were all terminated for cause. The company's reputation in the logistics industry was destroyed. Major clients pulled their contracts. Insurance costs skyrocketed because of the liability issues. The depot that had employed over 100 people closed its doors 18 months after the scandal broke. Calvin left Somerset entirely after everything came out. I heard through mutual connections that he'd moved west, started over somewhere new. I hoped he found the peace he was looking for. Despite everything, I understood why he'd done what he did, and I believed his remorse was genuine. Jason and I stayed in occasional contact. He remarried eventually, seemed happier than he'd been in years. Sometimes survivors of the same disaster need to check in with each other, just to confirm that they made it through. As for me, I didn't ask for money from the lawsuit settlements. I didn't want revenge that came with a price tag. What I got was something more valuable: vindication. The official record was corrected. My name was cleared. People who'd believed Nicole's lies learned the truth. Sometimes, when I drive past the old Ravenbrook exit on the motorway, I think about that night in the loading bay when I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. That one moment when I refused to look away, even though it cost me everything. And I realize now that standing my ground, refusing to play their games, refusing to become complicit in the corruption, it saved me in the end. Because if I'd bent, if I'd accepted their leverage and become part of their web, I would have fallen with them when everything collapsed. The truth didn't need my anger to come out. It just needed time and the right betrayal from the inside. Funny how karma works. It waits, patient and quiet, until the guilty start turning on each other. And then it strikes with perfect precision. The truth always comes out, eventually. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more stories that stay with you.